This is the transition we're going to create in this video. It's a nice little whip transition like so. If we give it a click on the timeline, open up the inspector, you can see that we've got a load of controls. This transition sits within your video transitions within the edit page, so you just drag it on any project, put it on there, hit play, and it's good to go. This will work on any timeline, so any resolution, any frame rate, and as you can tell, it's completely scalable, so it's the perfect whip transition. What up, folks? Yes, my name's Alex, and this is the video transition we're going to be looking at today. Now, we're going to be doing most of the work within Fusion, but it's a really cool process which shows you how to create these reusable, completely scalable assets using something called the Anim Curves. So there's loads of cool tips in this one. If you're not completely confident with Fusion, don't worry, because I am going to take it relatively slowly, but you will need some sort of base knowledge of Fusion so that you don't get too lost. If you are a complete beginner with Fusion, why not check out this beginner's guide posted by Jay Littman, link in the description below. Now, it's quite a long video, so buckle down, grab yourself a cold one, open Davinci Resolve, and let's get started. Now, all I've got so far is 2 clips on my timeline so that we can use those as a basis to create a transition. The timeline I'm using, let me just open it up, is a relatively low resolution. It doesn't actually matter what resolution you use. I'm just using 720p so that it runs really smoothly, just makes creating the transition much, much easier. And again, it doesn't matter what frame rate you use either, because this will work on any of them. So once you've done, let's get started. I'm first of all going to open up the effects library. I'm going to come down to Toolbox, Video Transitions. Now, right at the very top, just grab, you can actually grab any of these, but to make this easier, just grab this cross dissolve, drop it onto your edit point like so, and release. Then what we need to do is right click, and we need to convert this to a Fusion cross dissolve. So the standard cross dissolve we've just added onto our timeline isn't a Fusion transition. It's sort of a baked in transition that the developers have made and built into Davinci Resolve. We need to turn it to a Fusion cross dissolve so then we can actually open it up in Fusion, use it as our starting point to actually create our whip transition. It'll flicker, it won't really do much, and then if you right click again, you now have the option to open in the Fusion page. Give that a click, and you should see something that looks like this. Now, if you don't see the nodes at the bottom here, simply click on nodes, top left, to make sure that they appear. If you don't see this, you don't see media in 2, 1 with cross dissolve, sometimes it doesn't work first try, don't know why. So just go back to the edit page, right click, open in the Fusion page, and then it should appear as so. So we've got media in 1, 2, and media out. Media out is our end sort of result. And then media in is the first half. So this is sort of the in clip, which for me is this dancing dude here. And media in 2 is the second half, which is the singer lady here. Now, both of these nodes are coming into this cross dissolve. Now, as you can see, this is stacked. So you can see it's got sort of, looks like it's got 3 layers to it. That's a group. So if we double click, we can actually see what's in this group, and it's just a dissolve node. Now, that's slightly difficult to work on, so all you need to do, right click on cross dissolve at the top, ungroup, and that will get rid of the grouping so we can just see the actual dissolve node, and it's a little bit easier to work with. So what's happening at the moment? If I hit play, all that's happening is this is fading, this is dissolving between the 2 clips like so. So we're actually going to keep this dissolve, but what we want to do, we want to make this a little bit shorter so that the dissolve happens right in the middle, and then we can just use some blur to hide the fact that that dissolve is happening. So give that dissolve node a click. In the inspector, tools, make sure you're on dissolve 1, just double click on dissolve 1 if you don't see the options underneath, and then we can have a look at what's going on in here. Now, how this is working is this background foreground slider is simply going from 0 to 1, and that's making this dissolve happen. Now, how's that happening? It's happening using an Anim curve. At the top here, you've got tools and modifiers. If we click on modifiers, we can see there's an Anim curve on the dissolve 1 background to foreground slider. An Anim curve is a modifier within Davinci Resolve, which is one of the best things they added in Davinci Resolve 17. What it essentially is a percentage. The very beginning of the transition is 0, the end of the transition is 1. And it doesn't matter how long or how short the transition is, it will always just go from 0 to 1. And you can use that modifier to create transitions which will work on any timeline, any resolution, any frame rate, and will be any length. The Anim curve is the core of making these transitions. So how do they work? Well, simply at the top, you've got source and we've got transition. We're going to leave that as transition for the time being. And then we've got curve. So the curve at the moment is linear. So this is just going from 0 to 1 with no acceleration, nothing going on there, no fancy animations. It's just slowly going from 0 to 1. What I want to happen is it's just to happen right in the middle here. Now there are loads of options within here, but we're going to cover those a little bit later when it makes a little bit more sense. In the curve though, come down and change this to custom, and you get this little line graph. So this represents the path of our dissolve. So it's just going from 0, which is represented by this little box down here, to 1, which is this box over here. Now what I want to happen is for this to happen right in the middle of the transition. So all we need to do, grab this bottom left box and drag it into the middle somewhere, not quite on this middle line, but just before it. And then grab this end one and bring it over here. And now what's going to happen, this 0 to 1 is going to happen right in the middle here instead. So we've got a much faster dissolve in the middle like so. And that will happen, let me go back to the edit page, no matter how long or how short this is, right in the middle, it'll just do a nice little quick dissolve for us. And we're going to use that to hide our whip. So that's actually going to change the two clips within the middle of our whip. We're going to hide it with some blur and job done. And that is our dissolve done. So now we just need to do a transform to actually make the whip motion occur. From this little toolbar right here, grab this one. This is the transform. It's the little box with the two little arrows on it. Click, drag, pop it on this line until it turns blue and yellow like so, and then release. Give the transform a click, open up the inspector, and then you've got your controls within here. Now the one we want to work with is this center, and we've got X and Y. So if I just click on the number, hold my mouse, I can drag it left and right. So X is obviously left and right, Y's up and down. I'm going to double click on the word center just to reset that to the default. Now what we want to do is to move this over any of the directions to create our sort of whip animation. Now the first thing you'll notice, as soon as you move this out of the way, we end up with this checkerboard, which means there's nothing there. To get rid of that, come down to edges, and it's set to canvas by default. We can change it to wrap. Wrap will essentially just duplicate anything as it goes off screen so that you never have a blank image. Now if you prefer, you can change edges to be mirror instead. That will actually hide the edge a little bit more, but obviously the images will be mirrored like so. So it just depends on preference really. I'm going to go with wrap just because it's a little bit easier to work with. Cool. Now I'm just going to double click on center just to reset it again. We need to add an anim curve to our center, but anim curve doesn't quite work because we're using X and Y. So there's an additional step we need to use. Right click on center, go to modify with, and then come down to vector result. Once you've clicked that, the little keyframe icon will turn red and the modifiers tab at the top will become active. Click on modifiers, and then you've got this vector on transform one center controls within here. Now this vector allows you to control the center, so the location of our clips, without relying on the X and Y, so it's actually easier to animate. So the origin is simply the origin, where are we starting from? I'm going to leave that as 0.5 and 0.5, and then we can simply use a distance slider to change the distance that we're whipping in our instance. So we can just change whether we're going 1 or -1. We can actually go much higher, we can go all the way up to 5, we can just put whatever we want in this distance. The angle represents the angle that we're sliding. So if I now do it with a 84 degrees, you can see we're whipping up and down. And then the image aspect is a bit of an odd one. Just change this to 1. If you change it to 1, it'll work a little bit easier. You don't need to mess around as much. Don't know why it's set to that. Change it to 1 and then forget it. Now, before we do anything else, this is called vector on transform one center, which is a bit of a mouthful. It's a pain to remember, and we need to refer back to this a little bit later on. So while in the modifiers tab, simply hit F2 on your keyboard, and this rename toolbox will appear. And then we can just give this a name. So I'm just going to call this vector with a capital V, click on OK, and that will change the name to vector, and that just makes life a little bit easier later on. So this distance is what we want to animate using our anim curve. So I'm going to right click on the word distance, modify with anim curves at the top, and that will open up this anim curves on vector distance. Now again, bit of a mouth, so I'm going to hit F2. It's going to ask me to rename the first one again, which I don't want to do, so I'm just going to click on OK. I need to rename this anim curves on vector distance. I'm just going to call this distance, click on OK, vector distance. It's just easier to remember. So now if we hit play, all that's going to happen is it's going to whip 1 because it's going from 0 to 1 using our anim curve. Now what we can actually do is change this scale here. This scale will change how much that distance moves. So if I increase this, let's just go with 5, it's going to whip 5 across rather than the 1. And as you can see, that's sort of the basis for our whip transition. It's going to whip across right in the middle, our dissolve is going to happen, and job done. It's going to end there. Now the problem with this at the moment is it's linear. So it's just whipping across with no real acceleration, so it doesn't actually look very good. In this curve, it says linear, change that to easing. And then you've got these ins and outs. This one on the left represents the in animation, so sort of the animation that occurs in the first half of your transition. The out, the one on the right, represents the second half. So if we click the drop down, you've got a bunch of options within here. As a starting point, just change them both to Expo, click on play and see how you like that. I think that looks pretty good if you ask me, but you can of course play around with these, have a mess with them, have a look at different ones, see which ones you prefer. I've left a link down in the description below for a website which actually visually shows you how all of these look. So go and have a look at that website if you want to learn more, or just have a little experiment with these. I'm going to leave it as Expo for now. If you want to get really fancy, you can come down to custom. Then you get this curve again, like we had before for our dissolve. And if you want to animate the curve on its own, we can click to add a keyframe. We can do curves. We can do all sorts of fun stuff. And then if I hit play, it's going to do something mad like jittering all over the show like so. I don't want that for the time being, so I'm going to leave it as easing and Expo and Expo. So that's starting to look pretty good. We've got our whip transition. I've left the scale to 5, but we can amend that as needs be. And I'm leaving it as Expo. But again, I'm going to make that an option within the edit page so that you can pick it, change it as you need to. So what's next? We need to add some motion blur. Now there's loads of different ways to add motion blur within Fusion. There's some ways which are a little bit easy, you just tick a box and it does it for you, but it can be a little bit resource heavy and not everyone likes the way it looks. So what we're going to do is fake the motion blur using some directional blur. Now it's also a cool trick because I'm going to show you how to link different things together. So it's quite a nice way of doing things. Plus this blur is really lightweight. It doesn't take too many resources. So these transitions should be relatively easy to run. So first things first, click on transform on your node. So it's highlighted in red, then hit Control and space on your keyboard to open this select tool pop-up. Then all you need to do is type in directional or direct, just start typing directional, and then you'll get these options. So we've got directional blur, DRBL, and then directional blur with nothing afterwards. Click on the one at the bottom, directional blur with nothing within the brackets, and then click on add. They both kind of do the same thing. This directional blur is just slightly easier to use. It's easier to set the anim curves and link it and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to stick with that one. And that will add this directional blur node down here. Give it a click. In the inspector, we can have a look at the controls. And this is a really easy one to use. We've simply got blur strength. So how much blurriness have we got? And then we've got the blur angle. So if I increase the strength, move the angle, you can see the angle of this blur happens. So I'm just going to set this to 0 for now, so it's easiest to work with. And then it's this blur strength that we want to animate. So what I want to happen is in the middle to have loads of blur and then it to ramp down at the end. So it looks like it's happening naturally. So I'm going to right click on blur strength, modify with anim curves. But if I hit play, what's going to happen is it's going to go from 0 to 1. So it's just going to ramp all the way up like so, which isn't what we want. So if we click on modifiers again, we've got anim curves on directional blur 1 blur strength. First thing you want to do, hit F2, change this to be blur or blur strength, whatever you want to call it. That makes a little bit more sense to me. Underneath transition and linear, you've got mirror. If we tick that, what's going to happen is it's going to go from 0 to 1 right in the middle and then back down to 0. So it's just going to mirror the anim curve for us, which does exactly what we want it to do. Now I like to add a custom curve to this. Linear honestly kind of works. You could go to easing and then change it to one of these. Let's just choose one, see how it looks. That doesn't look too bad, but I want to add a custom curve because it's just the way that I think looks best. So I'm going to go to curve, change it to custom, and then all I like to do, click on the bottom one. You get this little handle appear, just drag this down. Click on the top one, the end animation, drag this down, and we just want a real basic sort of curve so that it starts off really slow, gets much blurry in the middle, and then fades off quite quickly. And if we hit play, that looks much more like it if you ask me. Again, we've got our scale. So at the minute, the blur is going up to 1. If we wanted even more blur, we can increase the scale. And if we wanted less, we could bring the scale down. Again, this is what we're going to have on the edit page so that we can amend this blur as we need to. So that's pretty much the base of our transition done. We just now need to link a few things together so that it's completely customizable and does exactly what we want it to do every single time, and then we can create the macro. So at the moment, if I hit play, this is working because we're whipping from left to right and our directional blur is going from left to right. So that looks pretty good. If I go to my transform node and then go to my modifiers and then back to the vector, this angle is what we're going to be able to change from the edit page so that I can change the angle of the whip. So let's set this to 90. Now what's going to happen here, it's going to go as an up and down transition, but our blur is still going from left to right. So that doesn't work. What we need to happen is as someone changes this angle, the angle of the blur changes at the same time. And you can do that using an expression. So we're going to link these two angles together. Now don't follow this, I just want to show you how it works. On this image aspect, if I right click, go to expression, it's going to give me this little window down here, and this is where we enter our expressions. There's a little plus icon. If you click and hold that and then drag up to angle or up to anything else, it will put the word in there for you, and then these two attributes become links. So as I change the angle, you can see the image aspect also changes. So that's what we need to do with our directional blur, link it to this angle. So I'm just going to reset that because we don't actually want that. If I go to my directional blur, go to my tools, this blur angle is what we need to change. But I can't simply click and drag because A, it's on a different node, and B, one of them is a modifier and one of them is a tool. So what we're going to do is just enter it manually. So I'm going to right click on this blur angle and I'm going to go to expression. Now this is why it was really important that we named things earlier. So in here, I just need to refer back to my angle. So I'm going to go back to my transform, go to my modifiers. It's called vector with a capital V and it's angle with a capital A. That's why it was important we named those. So my directional blur, tools, blur angle, I'm simply going to go vector with a capital V, dot, angle with a capital A, and done. So now this blur angle is linked to our vector angle. So 27.4, 27.4. As we change this, our directional blur is going to change. Now there is a slight problem. For some reason, Blackmagic decided to do the blur angle in the opposite direction to the vector angle. No idea why. One goes clockwise, one goes anti-clockwise. It's really, really annoying. So there's one extra thing you need to do. You shouldn't need to do it, but because Fusion, because Blackmagic, you do. In this blur angle, all you need to do is put a minus in front of it, and that fixes the issue so that the blur is going in the same direction. Annoying, but there you go, you have to do that. So now in the transform, in the modifiers, as we change the angle, let's just put one up here. That will whip in the exact right direction. Now, as you can see, it won't quite finish in the same place. You will need to mess with the distance later on if you want to do sort of a 45-degree one. But all of your zeros or 180 degrees will work absolutely perfectly like so. So we've created our transition, it's animated, it's all linked together, and the blur is doing exactly what we want it to do. The last step is simply to create a macro, save it to the right place, so then this transition can be accessed from the edit page, dropped onto the timeline and used whenever you want to do it. Now to do that, we need to pick the criteria, the options that we want to have accessible. We're going to do that by creating a macro. It looks fancy, but honestly, it's actually quite simple and easy to do. So let's do that. Now I want you to use your imagination for a second. This is our transition here, let's pretend, and this is our inspector. These controls appear in a very particular order. So this is center, pivot, size, aspect. You probably don't want the blur to appear higher in this list than your transform options. We want to be able to choose the direction and then choose the amount of blur afterwards. Now, when you select these things to create the macro, the order in which you select them is the order in which they will appear in the inspector. That will make more sense in a moment. But what I like to do then, dissolve, I don't really care about, so I'm going to put it at the top. Transform is my most important, directional blur, somewhere in the middle. And then when I click my mouse, hold, drag, I'm selecting in that order of priority. And that, in my opinion, is just the easiest way to do it. So order them in priority from bottom to top or top to bottom. Click your mouse, drag to highlight just these three. You only need these three middle nodes. Then we just simply right click on one of them, go to macro, and we're going to create a macro. And this macro editor window here will appear. Now you'll notice, look, I've got transform 1, directional blur, dissolve. So that in the order that I selected them. transform, directional blur, dissolve. So that's why it's important just to order them within your nodes when you highlight them. Just makes life easier when you're selecting them, and it changes the order of the controls as they appear in the edit page. Now, what's not immediately obvious, you can move this macro editor wherever you want it. You can even put it on a different monitor if you've got two, and then you can still click around on your nodes, have a look in the inspector to see all of your controls to make sure that you're selecting the right things. And what we need to do, really simply, if I expand transform, I just need to tick the boxes of all the things that I want access to once it's on the edit page. So I'm going to go to transform, I'm going to go to tools. Do I need any of these options? I don't care about any of these. The only things I care about are these modifiers. I've got distance and then I've got vector. So I'm going to go to vector. I've got origin, distance and angle. Do I care about the origin? I do not. Do I care about the distance? I do not, because that's being controlled by the anim curve. The only thing I care about here is the angle. So I'm going to tick angle. I'm going to expand on distance, which is my other modifier. What do I care about from here? Curve, in and out, and then the scale. So I'm going to go to curve, tick that. I've got in, it actually says in and out, but it's the in, and then I've got the out. I'd recommend that you tick lookup as well. Lookup simply refers to this funny little graph here. So if you do decide you want to add a custom curve later on, you can do. And then I'm going to tick scale because I want to amend the whip scale. Now at any point you can actually change the name of these as they appear. So scale doesn't mean a huge amount, so I'm going to just change this to be whip amount or whip scale, whatever you want it to be. Let's keep going down. That's everything I need from there. What else do I need? Directional blur. Do I need anything from the tools? Blur strength, blur angle? I don't, because they're all being controlled as it is. So we're going to go to our modifiers. The modifier is called blur. Do I need the curve? No, I'm happy with that. So the only thing I want here is this scale. So I'm going to go to blur. I'm going to locate scale, tick that box. I'll change the name and call it blur scale. That will do nicely. Do I need anything out? Dissolve? No, that's all working. So I'm pretty happy with that as it is. We've got our vector angle, we've got our controls for the amount, and then we've got our blur scale. Once that's done, the macro name at the top here, just give this macro a name. So this is important because this is the name of the transition as it's going to appear on the edit page. So I'm going to call this whip transition custom. I'm having to call it custom because I've already got one that's called whip transition, but you can call it whatever you want. Once that's done, click on File, top left, and then go to Save As, and this window will appear. And then all I need you to do is to save this to any location that's easily accessible on your computer. It doesn't need to be the right folder just yet, so literally just save it. I'm going to do mine on my desktop, set up a folder in your documents, or wherever you want to put it. So I'm going to go with desktop, whip transition custom. I'm going to simply hit save. Once that's done, I can close this macro editor to get it out of the way. So there we go, we've created our custom transition. We just now need to re-import it into Resolve in the right place so that it's ready to go. So make sure to open your effects library. So clicking on effects, top left-hand corner, still within the Fusion page. Open up templates, open up edit, and then click on the word transitions. And then this list of all the transitions will appear here. You might not see as many as me. You'll probably just see the default Fusion transitions if you've never imported any of your own. Then outside of Davinci Resolve, just open your My Computer, a folder, file manager, whatever you've got, and then browse to the location of that custom file which we just created. So mine's on my desktop, whip transition custom is here, and then all we're going to do, click my mouse, hold, drag, and I'm going to release here, where all these transitions are within Davinci Resolve. Just release your mouse, and that's it. Minimize or get rid of this folder. And then just to make sure it's worked, click on transitions. We've got this big list here. Scroll down until you get to the area simply called transitions, and you'll see all the default ones here. So we've got brightness, flash, camera shake, circles, etc. Scroll down and you should hopefully see whip transition custom or whatever you've called it. Now I'm going to leave all these here just in case something's gone wrong and I want to go and test this transition. So I'm going to hop back onto the edit page. I'm going to just duplicate this clip so we've got another clip at the end like so. Make sure I've got a handle, which I do. And then we're going to go to the effects library, go to video transitions, scroll all the way down until we get to this Fusion transitions area. And within here, I should now see my whip transition custom. Click, drag this onto my edit point, hit play, and perfect. It's doing exactly what we want it to do. Now, if you saw that whip transition custom on the Fusion page, but once you've gone back onto the edit page, it's not there. Sometimes that happens. Fusion and Resolve just do weird things. Close Davinci Resolve and then just open it back up, and hopefully you should now see it on the edit page. If I give that a click in the inspector, I've got all my controls. I've got angle, curve, in and out, whip amount, and blur scale. So let's make this a little bit longer. So this will be completely scalable. Perfect. Let's change the in and out animation. Let's just go with back. Back's kind of a funky one because it goes the wrong way and then whips across. That looks pretty good. And the minute my whip amount is 5, let's go with 2. Let's go with something a little bit less. Whee! That works pretty good. Now, because we've lowered the amount, there's a bit too much blur, so let's just lower this blur scale. Hit play. And that's perfect. If I change this angle to, let's say, 45 degrees, so we've got sort of a corner whip, it won't quite work, it won't land, it won't finish in the right place. All you then need to do is just increase the whip amount just to get it about right. I'm going to go with that. And then if we hit play, perfect. Now, one super final quick tip, save this project, this timeline with this original transition on it, the one we created within Fusion, because then at any point we can just open it up by right clicking, open in Fusion. So we've got all of this here. And then if you want to create any different presets, so let's, for example, this one by default is whipping to the left. We could come in, change the direction within the transform to say that this one is a 90-degree one instead. Repeat that macro creating process, but call this one whip up, save it, and then you've got the original whip, and then you've also got a whip up. Or whatever you want. You can just make as many different transition presets as you like, all based off this original transition which we've created in Fusion. Now, all of those tools that you've learned have loads of other effects. You can use them to create not just transitions, but titles, effects, and loads of other really cool stuff, which I will be covering in future videos. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your transition. Take it easy, and I'll see you next time.